Welcome to Pick Yourself Up. I am Assegid Habtewold, your host. Today I have a guest. His name is Matthew Breman. He is the Regional Director for Africa at International Youth Foundation. Matthew, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
For the people who want to know who Matthew is, what's that one word that would describe you?
I would say service.
Why that?
My whole life has been dedicated to that. I was raised in it. Both my parents have been involved and continue to be involved in public service. And I've continued that in my own career in life.
I was intrigued when I heard about your story. You have a very strong tie with Africa. Would you mind to tell me briefly about your tie in Africa?
Sure. So I was conceived in Guinea, Conakry. So my parents were living there before I was born. And then I lived when I was a young person for 5 years in Upper Volta, which is now Burkina Faso. And then in my professional life, I've lived in Cape Verde, Guinea-Bissau, and Angola. So bon dia, bonjour, como de corpo for those who speak Creole. It's been a fantastic journey, and really it's shaped who I am, both my upbringing and my professional life. So everything I've done has been really revolved around service and Africa, which I call my roots because that's sort of where I was raised and grew up, and young people, which for me represent the majority of people on the continent.
At International Youth Foundation, what kind of service do you give to the youth in Africa?
Great question. We see young people as what we call demographic dividend and an opportunity. They are leaders today, not just tomorrow. And so what we do is we help equip them to realize the future they want. And that looks like there are three really areas we work in. One is around youth agency, which is how young people can actually be a part of systems that impact them, make sure that the stakeholders around them are responsive to their needs. A second is around economic opportunity, which is jobs, self-employment, traditional employment. We do a lot around that and preparing young people for work. And then the third one is the systems work and making sure that systems are youth inclusive and that the other two pieces I talked about, youth agency and economic opportunity, are based on a whole ecosystem of players and actors that are responsive to their needs and supporting where young people need to go in terms of getting jobs and being leaders of today. Young people, I'll just say very quickly, young people have energy, they have creativity, they have passion, they're risk takers. There's a lot that we need to be able to leverage, especially those of us who are a little older and who have less of some of those traits, and we just aren't doing enough.
So what is the connection between the youth and those of us who grew up? Because there is something we can also offer to the youth. As much as the youth has the passion, the energy, risk-taking, what do they need from the grown-ups?
Yeah, great question. So when we do our programming, there are really three areas that we see are critical. One is mentorship. And so how can those who have experience carry a young person under their wing, so to speak, and help them and talk through sort of their path and their goals and what they need, the types of traits they need to actually realize their dreams. The second, I would say, is what I call on-the-job training, internships, whatever you want to call it. Young people need experience in areas they think they want to go in, and they have to see the actual in action. And the third one is networks. Young people need to have access to people in positions of decision-making and responsibility so they actually can see where it is that they want to be and then how they can get there. Because as life is all about relationships and contacts, all the work that we do, it's about partnerships and relationships. Yeah. As you know, on the continent, nothing gets done at a meeting. It's actually the coffee shop or informally. Exactly. That's how life is. And so those networks are critical when you're young. You don't have as many. And so the older generation adults can certainly help with that too.
I'm interested in a mentoring because last time I interviewed Joshua, you know him, and I interviewed him as a mentee. And he was talking about the benefits of having a mentor. Now, from your perspective, what are the most important things mentors should do to help and empower someone?
For me, with young people, the number one thing is listen. Young people, I think this is a generic comment, but having a caring adult in your life is really important, and unfortunately it's not the case that a lot of people actually have that. And we're at home, our parents have a bias, they don't always listen the way we would like them to. So having an adult, a caring adult, listen to them and hear their story and ask the questions to get to know them as an individual is really important. Because with the types of questions and the types of responses what a mentor gets from a mentee are very different than a parent from a child or even a family member. And I think that space is really important. And then once you listen as a mentor, you then can start just using your own background experience that I just talked about for mentorship and internship and networks, and you start connecting people. And that's what I actually enjoy doing. I hear what their story is, and I think about people that would be interesting for them to talk to. And I make sure that young people never leave a meeting without asking the person they're talking to about, are there one or two people that you think would be interesting for me to talk to? So then they get introduced and the conversation continues so they can help build that network around their common interests.
I like that because, theoretically you cannot help someone, you can't mentor. So creating those kind of connections, giving them opportunities to practice, because that gives you the opportunity to give them on-the-job kind of mentoring. I like that. Let's talk about U.S. and Africa. Our major viewers are African immigrants. And other people from other countries, immigrants mainly, but I believe that I have also some American viewers. So they would be interested to know about, the viewpoint of Americans about Africa. You and I were talking about that before we started the show. It looks like America lagged behind in investing in Africa. Other countries are engaged, more involved in Africa. How do you see that?
Generally speaking, I think there's a fear factor. Why is because of the negative press that you see. And the critical piece, I think, for Americans that perhaps is different than the Chinese or some others that are investing heavily on the continent is that our businesses are risk averse. We want to do our due diligence, and we want to do all these various things to make sure that our investment is actually going to reap returns, because we don't know. It's the dark continent. We don't know what's there. So I think what's really important is to debunk some of these negative myths. So on the continent, it's how do you, one, bring the American investors and others to the continent so they can actually see for themselves and experience for themselves what the continent is all about and see all the positivity. I mean, for me, the vibrancy, the colors, the sport, the food, the music, it's a long list of passion and really people-to-people contact. The openness is immeasurable. It doesn't exist in the Americas. It just doesn't exist certainly in the same way in this country. And so how can they then see that? Through relationships. That's how business gets done. It's not transactional. And we think in the United States about transaction and a contract that needs to be signed and shake your hand, and that's that. But it's much more profound than that. It's about individual connection and relationships. And so how do you bring the American to the continent, at the same time have the African government, company, young person, school, educator come to the United States and understand how you can make the connection with sort of our way, the American way of thinking and talking and sort of getting down to business and the way we think and work. Because I think that's really critical. It's how do you better understand the other culture without being informed and influenced by media. Everything today, it's even more through social media. That's where we get our information. You say Africa, people think it's one country. You say one country, I'll use Kenya, for example, country that's known in the United States. Kenya is huge and has many different parts. But you say Kenya in the United States and it's animals.
Yeah.
And you see animals in safari in Africa as if it's one country, Africa. And so how do you start debunking and saying, we have Senegal, we have Sudan, we have Nigeria, we have Kenya, we have Ethiopia, we have South Africa, we have Namibia, we have Mozambique, Tanzania, the list is long. And every country is different, and within those countries are different. And each country has hundreds of different languages that are spoken, which is, again, something that's very different and not understood in our country, which we tend to use. We have several languages, but a main language of English. But that's not how most countries function. It's sometimes hard for communities to talk across cultures within their own country in the same language. They're using a colonial language often to communicate. Yeah. So all these nuances and understanding is really important for people to experience for themselves. And so youth champions, there are many that are Africanists in the United States who are there, who are in this town, who live in this county, Montgomery County, who are a bridge and who understand these issues and can sort of help. And so how do we bring the diaspora and those who know Africa, who are from this country together and do more of this sort of dialogue? Because I think there's a lot of potential.
Yeah, you brought a lot of content. I was trying to catch up some of them. You mentioned about how the media is biased and picture Africa like, the dark continent, as if, Africa is a very desperate place where you don't have any chance to make business and so on. That's wrong, and that can only be corrected by going and seeing. You were telling me about, whatever you hear, whatever you read may not be accurate compared to, going and seeing that. One of the things you mentioned about is about understanding each other, Africans and Americans understanding. A week ago and also before yesterday, I was facilitating a workshop on unconscious bias, which is a diversity and inclusion workshop in one of the government agencies in Kansas City. And one of the things that I showed them is the main difference between cultures like Africa, communal cultures, and individual-based cultures like the U.S., and how time is organized differently, the difference in treating space boundaries, and also the context. You mentioned about, for example, in America, it's transactional. You want to do things quickly, but in Africa, it's relational, more of relationship. So that's important. We need to know each other to do business together.
I have a funny story to tell about this. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Guinea-Bissau in the early 90s, and I was a teacher at a boarding school in a very rural village. And I was told we have a meeting. One of the first days I'm in this village, I was told we have a meeting. It's at 1 o'clock, whatever the time was. So I show up a few minutes beforehand. I sit there for 7 or 8 hours. And watching people go by, and I'm like, isn't that person supposed to be in this meeting? And they're just talking, and this went on for hours. So I tell that story because it started me, I was very frustrated at first. But by week 2, I was not showing up at that time. I was saying, okay, this means really 4 o'clock or whatever it is. And so the importance of recognizing sort of that isn't important. That what actually is important to them is X, Y, and Z, talking and relationships and so forth is critical. But I will say that time management and some of these things are also important, and there's an opportunity, a teaching opportunity as well, to explain why our culture feels it's important to be on time and respect and all these things that are important to cultures, or different cultures, and why. And so respect looks different in Ethiopia than it might in the United States, and why, and what those definitions are. And that's the interesting conversation, because that's when you start to get to understand why cultures and people do business or work or interact differently.
Yeah, these are really great discussions. We're going to come back again after taking a quick break. Dear our viewers, we're going to be back. Let's take a quick break.
I come from a big family. I'm the oldest of 6. To me, being the first person to go to college, it's like setting a standard, My little brother is 8 years old now. I challenge his curiosity. I challenge him to dream. I have to paint a picture for him that he can look up to and live up to and possibly be better than. My name is Jaquez, and I am your dividend.
Welcome back. This is Pick Yourself Up. I am your host, Assegid Habtewold. In our studio, we have Matthew Breman. He is the Regional Director for Africa at the International Youth Foundation. We're going to continue our discussion about the importance of understanding cultures. That's important to the youth, that's important to business owners, that's important to community leaders. So let's spend a little bit time on the importance of understanding one another. We were talking during the break that you were telling me that there is a rush or there is intolerance in terms of, accepting difference. We always think that, things should be done the way we do, and we don't spend time to understand other people, and that creates conflict, tension, misunderstanding, and so on and so forth. Tell me more about that.
Yeah. Well, my view is that this country was founded, we're a land of immigrants based on people, and we're all from all different backgrounds. And that's the richness of this country is because of that. And we're in an interesting time today where we're not accepting of differences as much as we have been in the past, and we need to be, frankly, and we will be going forward. But that's something that I think we're all gonna we all have to think about. What I like to do is listen. I think the important part is for people to be aware that there is difference. We were talking also about unconscious bias and some of those issues. I think being aware that what we are saying is impacting how it's being received differently by different people, and being open to criticism and to feedback on that, because we are often, most of us are not intentionally trying to hurt people, but when we have dialogue that we have in this country today against negative dialogue against immigrants, when we know that these same immigrants are actually the types of people who built this country for and for, frankly, what it will be in the future, we have to recognize that and really take that into consideration, because I don't, anyway, I don't want to get into the politics, but I think a lot of people in this country understand that and certainly are concerned, and the good part is we're getting a lot more involved in social issues. We, the American people, are getting a lot more involved in social issues. In this county, where we have almost 50% of people in Montgomery County were either born in another country or their parents were born in another country. So we certainly are understanding of these issues here, but nationally it's a little different.
Yeah, I completely understand. I remember the next day where we had election nationally, the Montgomery County came out, the leadership, the police chief, everybody came out and say we continue to treat immigrants properly, we appreciate them, we embrace them. That was really touchy to me and many immigrants, because America is a land of immigrants, except that some came early, some came late, but this country is built on immigrants, and this is a competitive advantage for America, because that's one of the reasons why America is a superpower, and she doesn't want to really lose that by just becoming homogeneous, because even when you study companies who succeeds, those who have diversity out-earn those who are not diverse, because with the diversity comes creativity, with diversity comes innovation. You don't want to be stuck by just having homogeneous team in your organization. The same applies to nations, and I think there are a lot of Americans who appreciate that, but we need to speak up the importance of diversity and how we need to understand each other culturally so that we overcome tolerance, go to acceptance. There is a term called tolerance scale. We need to really go beyond just tolerating one another. We need to accept one another, even appreciate the difference.
Yeah, no, that's right. And actually, I don't like the word tolerance, because tolerating someone is like you're figuring out how it's okay for them to be there, but you really don't like them already. You don't. Yeah. And so it's how do you accept? Perhaps it's acceptance. And learn, because we are all learning from each other every day. We need to learn. I tell my children this is we're always learning, and no one knows everything. Yeah. And even as your parent, there are things that I don't know. Mm-hmm. And how do we cultivate that? And an immigrant coming over at the minimum knows a language that someone in this country doesn't. That's just the first thing, and you build from there. Their skills, technical skills. There's often, it depends on the immigrant, but we've got PhDs coming in this country, and we have laborers. And all of those are critical skills in this country and everywhere in between. And we also, I think the other piece to this is we want to recognize those skills through equitable pay and some other things that is another whole separate issue that we don't recognize, and it's all about business practices, and everyone's trying to sort of do squeeze the most for the least amount. But I think overall the key message here, I think, is how do we value and think positively about difference that's coming into this country, and how do we build on what we've been doing in the history of this country has done, because the future of this of our world, frankly, is going to be this mix. And it's not just in this country. It's going to be a mix. People are going into countries everywhere around the world, and they're mixing. I think in Africa, the clear example are the Chinese. They're actually going in. They're trying to assimilate as best as they can, and they have their own sort of ways of doing that through their own businesses. But they, in order to be successful, they have to figure something out. And why are they successful? They're actually staying in these countries. They're marrying into the countries. They're actually becoming a part of it. And I mean, there's a whole conversation around that, sort of the Chinese sort of in Africa. But my point is more around cultural integration and how we're going to become a world that's mixed with people of different backgrounds, colors, religions, sexes, and so forth. And we're going to have to deal with it. When I say we, I think it's the adults. Yeah. The young people get this. Yeah. The young people don't. These are not issues. Yeah. These are not issues for young people. They're open. They understand difference a lot more, I think, than some of us who've sort of been part of these more strict patterns of behavior that have sort of dictated who we think we're supposed to be. Yeah. And so there's a lot more fluidity. I think social media has helped in these ways, where people can actually communicate across cultures very easily and can understand what things are like for a same age person in another country. There are many more similarities than there are differences, as we know. And so how do we catalyze and support all of that? Because that's the future, and it's all going to be virtual, and there's no substitute for in-person, but a lot can get done virtually as well. Yeah, I mean, we have a common destiny as humans. Unless we embrace one another, accept one another, we can't really isolate ourselves and say, oh, I don't care about others, because we have a collective destiny, and we need to really embrace one another and accept one another. Let me take you to the African issue, because I want to really, because you have a lot of experiences in Africa. Africa now is young. If you take Ethiopia, 70% of Ethiopians are youth, and other countries on average, 60%, 50% young people in Africa. What kind of things are you providing to the youth in Africa through the International Youth Foundation to empower them? Yeah, so as you said, it's about 70% of the population of sub-Saharan Africa is under the age of 30. So we're not talking about young people, we're talking about majority of country populations. So if we start from the premise of we're talking about how to support the majority of your people who happen to be a certain age where they can actually be in their prime in terms of work and economic opportunity, and that's how we think, we've got to leverage that. There's absolutely no excuse not to. But our decision makers tend to be of a certain generation, and power and greed and influence and all these things that money are really important, and at the expense of the country. And so how do we get to a point where the young people can have this sense of agency and be part of systems? And often, we've done some research, and we know that young people don't feel like they're even allowed to be part of decision making within their village or part of political systems and parties within their countries. They feel like they're told not to be. If you, as a young person growing up, are being told that, you're already growing up in a often patriarchal system, it's really difficult. So think about the young woman who we know in sub-Saharan Africa, and I'm a male, but I have observed, do the bulk of the labor, raising the household, cooking, cleaning, taking care of the house. I mean, the production, the agricultural production, it's really dominated by women. And how do we, and so they're even more discriminated against from the sort of general young person. How do we get to a place where we're actually valuing everyone, no matter, your gender or your age, to actually create economic opportunity? Because the young people have ideas. I mean, the things that they're coming up with, the entrepreneurial ideas that they have, their applications that they're putting together. There's a young woman who's putting together in Kenya an application where it's basically for farmers to understand weather patterns to help increase produce. There's a lot that's happening on the continent that needs support. And these little pockets of activity, of positive activity, are unfortunately often driven by non-government interventions. And how do we get governments? Because for me, fundamentally, the government is critical to any progress. And so going back to your question, at the International Youth Foundation, we're working for young people to try and help position young people so they can realize their full potential and frankly realize the future they want for themselves. And so we do that through three sort of different areas of activity. I talked about earlier youth agency, economic opportunity, and sort of the youth inclusive systems. And I think that the big question for us now is, how do we get this to be systemic? Working through national governments, we often work through ministries of labor, departments of higher education and training, so that at those higher levels, they're actually understanding together, we're understanding a vision that we have. For us, it's creating economic opportunity or employment for young people, skilling young people. This resonates, it's part of most government national development plans. We make connections for them at those levels. And then others have different motivations. If you're in the private sector, you're trying to grow your agricultural production. In the hospitality sector, where 70% of workers are young people, you're trying to get young people better able to be successful. Often they're interpersonal, social, like some of what we call the life skills, the softer skills. And so all of those, we have partnerships with the private sector. We're creating pipelines of young people prepared to work in growth industries. We have skills that we're providing, the wraparound services, in self-employment. So using the example of hospitality, a hotel needs restaurants, laundry, bakeries, etc. Transportation, there are many opportunities. It's just exposing, showing people, look, this is going in here. How are they going to get there? How are they going to eat? How are they going to take care of their laundry? I mean, like, you've got an opportunity. But if the system, the enabling environment isn't there to allow them to go in and actually do it, all the paperwork and registration, all this stuff, it's really difficult.
I have a lot of questions, but I have only 1 minute. I'm out of time. Maybe I need to bring you back again to talk about those questions. With the remaining time that we have, how can people reach out to you to learn more about International Youth Foundation and what you do in Africa?
Our website, the International Youth Foundation, is at www.iyfnet.org, and you can find all of our information there, including how to contact us directly. I would say you'll see there a lot of our work is global. I'm talking about sub-Saharan Africa, but we work all over the world. We also cross-fertilize, and by that I mean we've learned a lot in different parts of the world, different countries. Our biggest programs right now are in actually Mexico, South Africa, Mozambique, and Tanzania. And by biggest, I mean we're systemically working through national vocational training systems, through ministries of labor, and all the way down to community level, to systemically change the way young people are prepared for the world of work. And so that, I think, is exciting, and we're sharing across countries. A lot of the learnings, we're bringing government people together across countries who would have perhaps never come in contact, even neighboring countries, Mozambique and Tanzania, for example. So we're doing a lot. You can certainly check out our website to find out more. And I'd encourage certainly the young people out there to think a bit about sort of three things. When I travel and talk to young people, I want them to be sure to be successful. There's sort of three things I like to say. One is work ethic. Working hard and being responsible is critical. The second is honesty and integrity. It may not feel like it because you might feel like you're the only one who's doing it, but everyone around you is noticing it and seeing it. And the third is a positive attitude. And if you have those three things, and if you do them and are religiously following those, guarantee you'll be successful. And if you trip up on one or two of those, it might be more difficult. But those are the three things that I feel resonate. They resonate with me, and certainly how I've been raised and how I sort of view work. And the young people, I think, that will talk about this, role models that we use, young people, other young people who've been successful, say the same things, and you see these same traits. And so I encourage folks to think about that.
All right. On behalf of our viewers, thank you very much for coming. I know you're very busy. Dear our viewers, this is my hope that you got a lot out of this discussion. Until I see you with another program, have a great day. Thank you very much for watching.